Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Sasae, President of Japan Institute for International Affairs. Welcome to JIIA Open Forum, both in person and online. This time, we are going to talk and discuss about the U.S. elections. And obviously, what happens as a result of election has an enormous impact, not only on the U.S. Domestic landscape, but also on a global landscape, including this part of the world, and also possibly Japan-U.S. partnership and alliance. And today we have very eloquent and well-known authority and expert, our friends, Glen Fukushima and also Ken Weinstein. You know, Glen is largely representing liberal and democratic side. I don't say Democratic Party or Harris, but of course we know what kind of ideological, even policy orientation he has developed so far. And the other one is Ken Weinstein. I don't say he does represent Trump, but he could be, but he is basically on the conservative and Republican side. So today we'd like to have a good discussions, comparing notes about each participant's positions and how they think about the situations. First of all, let me ask each speaker to talk 5 minutes roughly on what they think about the current situation, where the election is going. And then we will go into discussion. I'd like to address basically three things. How is the elections? I mean, where it could be ending up. Secondly, what is the impact of the situation, whether Harris or Trump will be winning, and of course the impact is different, but there could be some common trend too. So, and then finally, we'd like to address the regional impact and also bilateral. So, welcome, gentlemen. And first of all, you'd like to start first? Grant, possibly? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ken, for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting Ken and me to the event. I was thinking that it was 35 years ago, 1989, when we first met, because you were heading the second North American Affairs Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I was just getting ready to leave USTR. So it's been a long time. A lot has happened, but
it was an interesting time.
Yes. And it's great to be with Ken. We're friends in Washington, D.C., and we're getting together here in Tokyo. So in the 5 minutes that I've been allotted, let me just say first, I prefer progressive to liberal, but in any case, the way I look at the election now is until July 21, it was a very boring race because we had President Biden and former President Trump, and it looked increasingly after the debate. Well, I'll get there later, but anyway, I think that the race was rather boring. We had two elderly 81, 78-year-old candidates, and there were double haters who voters were not excited about either. And then because of the June 26 TV debate on CNN and President Biden doing so badly, and 3.5 weeks later on July 21, he withdrew. From July 21, it's become a very interesting race, and the race has completely changed. I'd say that as a result of Kamala Harris becoming the candidate, the nominee eventually for the Democrats, that it's really excited the base of the Democratic Party. So I think women, minorities, young people who weren't that interested in the race became much more interested. And so right after the change in July 21, a couple of weeks later was a Democratic convention in Chicago. So that raised more excitement. And then the TV debate on the 10th of September also, I think, encouraged a lot of supporters of the progressive side to think that there may be a chance for progressives to win this election. So I think the momentum at that time was going in favor of Kamala Harris. I think the last 2 or 3 weeks, things have stabilized. And I think that things are pretty much a toss-up. I think of the 7 battleground states, I think that Michigan, Wisconsin are leaning in favor of Kamala Harris, Georgia and Arizona and North Carolina, and probably in favor of Donald Trump. Nevada and Pennsylvania are up for grabs. So I think I would not be surprised if either side wins. So in terms of how the election will end up, that's how I'm viewing the situation right now. With regard to your second question about impact, I personally believe that there will be a significant impact difference whether former President Trump or Vice President Harris wins, both on domestic policy and on international policy. And we can spend an hour talking about this, but I would say that even if we accept that Project 2025 is not going to be the basis, the blueprint for a Trump administration, many of the ideas and proposals in that document, I think, will be taken up by people in the Trump administration. So in terms of policy, as well as in terms of personnel, there will be significant change and probably an attempt to try to overturn what the Biden administration has tried to do. So I think there will be significant differences domestically and also foreign policy, clearly with regard to Russia, perhaps with regard to China, with regard to Israel. We will see significant differences. And we can go into the details, the content later. As far as U.S.-Japan relations concerned, I'm actually not convinced that there will be that huge difference between the two, in part because I think that the U.S.-Japan relationship now, both on the security side and on the economic side, is one of mutual need. I think each side needs the other, especially because of the competition with China and also with North Korea. So I think that there are not major areas of disagreement between the two countries. So I think that to the extent that U.S. relations with China or North Korea or Russia or other countries changes, then that could affect U.S.-Japan relations. But in terms of U.S.-Japan relations directly, with the possible exception of things like greater defense burden sharing that might be expected by a Trump administration, I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of difference. I think the Trump administration will have other priorities, both domestic and international. And I think a Harris administration also would see that the U.S.-Japan relationship is one that requires more continuity and stability rather than significant change. So I spent 5 minutes, so let me end there.
Okay, please.
Great. Yes. Whoops, am I on? Great. Well, first, let me just say that it's an honor to be with you, Ambassador Sasae. Honored to be with my buddy Glen Fukushima, whom I disagree with, but hold in enormous regard. And it's a pleasure to be with so many familiar faces here at the very prestigious JIIA. Yeah, my read on the election is a little bit different than Glen's, needless to say. I would say that this election at first was really a referendum on the Biden administration and on its policies more than anything else. And when you look at where the United States was and where the world was when Donald Trump left office, and you look at where the United States and the world are today, we see some very different things. And much of this was emblematic, or was I would say the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan was sort of emblematic of many of the Biden administration's of the Biden administration changing foreign policy. And I think it was that one event that really ended President Biden's honeymoon with the American public and showed the American public that President Biden was neither a sort of moderate, sensible internationalist, strong on national security, nor was he calm or deliberate in pursuing his policies. And it was really at that moment that I think he actually lost any chance of being reelected as president. With the surprise of the 2024 election for me was Donald Trump sort of emerging so strongly as the Republicans' presidential candidate, particularly after he had been subject to a serious campaign of lawfare in which charges were brought up against him, particularly in Manhattan by District Attorney Alvin Bragg. You know, charges never brought up against anyone else, past the statute of limitations, et cetera, et cetera. And what this, the conviction in New York and even the trial in New York really rallied Republicans around Donald Trump to a degree where, as a point prior to that, it looked like Ron DeSantis and Trump were neck and neck, and all of that changed in the aftermath. Of course, heading into the Republican convention, you know, with the disastrous debate performance and many people questioning President Biden's ability to continue to serve not only as candidate, but as president, we had the horrific assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, and Trump's dramatic choice of J.D. Vance at the Republican convention as his vice president. Trump's belief in politics is that rather than trying to expand your base, that the question is turnout and sort of bringing new voters into the electoral process. And I think this has been a much better run campaign from the Republican side than either in 2016 or in 2020. A lot of micro-targeting, a lot more focused campaign. The campaign is doing well very strongly among Jewish voters, first time since Ronald Reagan's 1980 election that Republicans likely to get close to 40% of the Jewish vote. Also doing well among Hispanics who voted very strongly for Trump in a surprise in 2020, but seem likely to do so. They are socially conservative, and they are also increasingly anti-immigration. Lastly, strangely so, even among Arab Americans, Trump is doing well because of a targeted presidential campaign. I'd say the following: the reason why I support Donald Trump, and the reason why I think he will actually emerge victorious on November 5th, but I think it's going to be a very close race, is that Donald Trump understands one thing, that is deterrence. That he understands first that America needs strong, secure borders, that national security is absolutely critical. He would never have withdrawn from Afghanistan the way that President Biden did. He would never have removed the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, which were taken as a signal by President Putin to go into Ukraine. He would never have courted Iran to try to bring it back into the nuclear deal, and by not enforcing the sanctions on oil in Iran, you emboldened not only the Islamic Republic, but you put money back into the coffers of the Islamic Republic's proxies, and our allies in the Middle East paid for it. So I think at the end of the day, though Vice President Harris had certainly a strong convention, I think that her candidacy is starting to fade a bit. She has started to do TV interviews that have left Americans very puzzled. And she had a strong debate, there's no doubt, but that she has done TV interviews that have left Americans puzzled as to what she is thinking, as to whether she is actually capable of herself managing the kind of major foreign policy crises that come to a head. And so I think that Trump is really starting again to pick up momentum in the last few days. The more people see Harris doing friendly interviews and not doing them terribly well. So let me note, what are the implications for the world? I am concerned about a Harris presidency. I think it will be a return of many of the Obama team to foreign and defense policy posts, a team that preferred oftentimes to make preemptive concessions to our adversaries rather than to show signs of strength. And that really worries me, because I don't think at the end of the day the president is going to be making the decisions. On the other hand, in terms of the regional impact here, look, Donald Trump and Shinzo Abe had an incredible relationship that brought the U.S.-Japan relationship back to the fore and made it the primary U.S. Alliance around the globe. I think that that will continue. Donald Trump accepted the free and open Indo-Pacific from Japan. Those policies were continued by the Biden administration, which I think has done an excellent job building out the lattice alliance and partner structure here in Asia, and they've done far better in Asia than they have in either the Middle East, which is a disaster, and Europe, where we had, the invasion of Ukraine. Donald Trump, incidentally, was the only president of 4 presidents in the 21st century who did not, under whose presidency land was not lost to Russia. But my sense is that if Harris comes in, I think there's going to be significant consternation about uncertainty about the direction of her policy. Certainly, if Trump comes in, Donald Trump has a tendency to think out loud when he does policy, which leaves people a bit at unease. But that's Trump's policy process as he thinks through decisions. But I think that Japan has undertaken many of the changes that President Trump has wanted, increasing defense spending, stepping up in the alliance, understanding it is responsible for its own national security, taking seriously the security needed in the Southwest Islands. In the case of a Taiwan contingency, I think the relationship will be strong, will be very positive. The broader regional impact, I firmly believe that Trump, as a deterrent-first president, will make sure to be tough on China. He will continue communications with Xi Jinping, but he understands the nature of the Chinese threat, both economically and politically, but he is not one of these Republicans who is so focused on Taiwan exclusively that he doesn't see the sort of broader picture, the broader implications as a result. So that's where I see things stand. And now back to you, Ken.
Okay, Ken, let us concentrate first on the how the election will go for the remaining period. Both of you, well, I don't say agreed, but I think the race is quite close and neck almost, including the public opinion poll around the contested swing states of the sort as you just mentioned. But what do you think? I mean, in terms of momentum, as Glen said that compared to the time when President Biden was trying, it was very difficult for the Democrat to expect that he'll be winning. Then suddenly there is an upsurge of the support to Harris, which is bringing Harris in a more sort of upbeat mode of the thought. But the question is that is he really winning in terms of elected bodies among the swing states? So, and in the meantime, there is some theory, especially among Republicans. And Trump is always doing better when there was election rather than the public opinion poll in advance. So, and the question arises not necessarily on the policy; it's more on the how you could mobilize the core supporters of the sort. So, what's your view, more in detail? Is what's your analysis? I mean, about this final phase. Yeah, you go first.
Look, I think, this is a turnout election. This is the number of undecideds are relatively small. And I think both sides are doing all they can to turn out the vote. Harris has a huge money advantage. She outraised President Trump by $150 million in August. I think she's approaching $500 million raised, which is extraordinary. And the Harris team is going to focus on female voters, on African-American women, on university students, union households and the like. Trump, on the other hand, has made a serious play for African-American males, for Hispanics, as I mentioned earlier, and the Jewish community, which is critical in Pennsylvania. 3% of the vote is Jewish, and the fact that Harris passed over the very popular governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, for Tim Walz, who had a rather lackluster debate performance, is something that the Jewish voters aren't likely to forget. And then Trump is also pitching to new sort of communities that are considered among the undervote, among people who vote less than they normally do. And he's been doing a number of these podcasts aimed at particularly men 25, 28 and under. that have huge followings, podcasts I've never heard of, but under the belief that by getting these people out to vote, this will help motivate the situation. You know, my sense is that the Harris campaign, get out the vote effort, is going to be very effective, but that if she is going to close this deal, she has to convince voters that she can lead. She can lead on day one, and she'll be a convincing, coherent president. When you hear those things are certainly important, and it's by far the most important thing. But I do think the momentum is now, it's swung back and forth, certainly. It was, you know, Trump was way up before Biden was the nominee. And Harris had an amazing rise from 30% popularity to almost 50% popularity in public opinion polls, because the mainstream media, which is, in my view, a unofficial arm of the Democratic Party, started to praise her and her performance. But I think some of that luster is now coming off because voters themselves are seeing what she's like face to face. They know who Trump is. They don't all love him. You know, there are things about him they don't like, but people do remember a strong Trump economy before COVID hit, and they do remember a world that was much more at peace without wars in the Middle East, major wars in the Middle East and Europe under his tenure. So, on the states, with Glenn, I would disagree. I think Nevada is leaning towards Trump, but I agree that Michigan and Pennsylvania are the big two. There's a new poll that showed Trump ahead in Michigan this morning. I don't know whether to believe that or not, but Pennsylvania is going to decide everything.
So Ken, you
Okay,
gave,
Glen,
you
of
gave
course.
Ken 9 minutes. I only had 5
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah, okay, you could, yeah, speak more than what you want.
Okay, so I agree with Ken. It is a turnout election. And precisely because of that, I think that Kamala Harris has the advantage because she is getting the women and the youth and the minorities out to vote. This is very much a turnout election. And as far as the Democrats are concerned, abortion is a huge issue. I mean, women are, even in conservative states like Kansas or Ohio, overwhelmingly, when there's a referendum of some sort, pro-abortion comes out 60 to 70%. So I think that's a real strength of the Democrats and of Kamala Harris. And I think that she can speak with a conviction on this, whereas Biden, partly because of his whole history of relations with women stretching back to 1991 in the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing, where Biden was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and being a Catholic, I think that kind of inhibited him from really pushing on this abortion issue. But I think abortion will be a huge issue in favor of Democrats. I think this election, in many ways, is the past versus the future. I think Donald Trump represents the past. It's make America great again. It's like 1950s. All the white men are in charge, no women, no minorities. It's really hearkening back to the past. And I think Americans now want to look for the future. And Kamala Harris represents the future and optimism. And if you look at the Democratic National Convention, it is about the future. I mean, one of the slogans is, we're not going back. We're not going back to the racism and the sexism and the misogyny that we've seen in the United States. I mean, that's the message that Kamala Harris has. And that's a message that's very attractive to women, minorities, and youth. Maybe not so much to white males, but it is the future. And so I think that is a huge difference. And I think that's a real advantage that Kamala Harris has. Also, it's really interesting. Most recently, the polls indicate that the voters think that Kamala Harris represents change more than Donald Trump, which I think is an amazing feat, because Kamala Harris being a part, the vice president of this administration, the Republicans trying to pick, attach her to every failure. And I agree, Afghanistan was not one of the higher points for the Democrats, but the fact that she represents change for voters, I think, really shows you that the voters see her as someone who represents the future, not the past. Also, I'm curious to know Ken's explanation of why it is that so many people who have worked for and with Trump have signed letters saying that he's unfit to be president, whether it's Kelly, his former chief of staff, or whether it's John Bolton, former national security advisor. There's a whole group of people, as you well know, in the hundreds, who signed letters saying that Trump is unfit to be president. And most recently, Liz Cheney I mean, Liz Cheney, one of the most conservative Republicans, and her father, Dick Cheney, one of the most conservative Republicans, have publicly come out not only to say that they're not going to vote for Trump, they're saying they're going to vote for Kamala Harris. That's an extraordinary indication of just how much Americans who are educated have a real problem with Trump as just being not fit to be president. He's unpredictable, he's impetuous, he thinks only about himself. And this whole, I mean, Bob Woodward's book, which just came out, which I don't know if you believe, but according to Bob Woodward, and he has pretty good sources in Washington, having been there for 50 years, says that Donald Trump sent COVID tests to Vladimir Putin, and Putin asked Trump to keep it secret, not for himself, but he said, you know, you're going to be harmed if you reveal this. Also, there have been probably maybe 7 or more phone calls between Putin and Trump. So when you talk about deterrence and protecting the border, protecting national security, I think Trump is the last person we should think about in terms of deterrence.
You want to respond to that? Can you? Yeah, of course. But this could be a sophisticated version of Harris-Trump debates. I mean, but in your talking, can you include some of the elements you discuss about Pennsylvania? Because most of the people agree that Pennsylvania could be vital. And you talk about Jewish and younger, Middle East, and energy, possibly energy issues too, fracking issues too.
Yeah.
But it's going back and forth. I mean, over the past months or so. But you could go beyond that, please.
Great. Well, let me just respond to Glen's charges here. Yeah. Look. Yeah. First of all, racism, misogyny, and what was the third one? I wrote. I can't read. Sexism. Okay. Look, Trump. First of all, I think Trump is going to, in the end of the day, get record numbers of African American males. I agree that Harris has locked up African American women as the nominee. He will get record numbers of Hispanics. The campaign, the transition team is very much focused on putting women into serious positions of power in the administration. If the Republicans win, and I think we will see that. And the fact that Harris has been able to convince people that she's an embodiment of change is remarkable, because both she and President Biden have said that she has admitted she totally agreed with everything that Biden did, had no regrets, and Biden has had the same and said she has been with me at every major decision. As to the people who've worked with Trump in the past and don't support him, Donald Trump is a tough person to work for. He's very demanding. He's very difficult. He doesn't take, this is why we do things business as usual. At the end of the day, that's just not the way that he thinks. He does not think like a typical policy person. He's an outside the box thinker who certainly is willing to raise questions that other policy makers haven't been able to raise. It's an unusual policy style that oftentimes synthesizes direct polar opposite positions, whether it be fire and fury in Pyongyang, but let's offer beachfront condominiums to the North Koreans to try to get them to give up nuclear weapons. On Iran, it's maximum pressure, but let's get to a new deal that actually ends the nuclear program and ends the regional activities, ends the missile program. And on China, it's maximum tariffs, but to get to a new trade deal that will end intellectual property theft that he saw as the engine behind China 2025. And I think it's working under Trump time is painful for people in the administration. He doesn't have the patience for long discussions, and he and John Bolton just disagreed from day one. It was a terrible choice as National Security Advisor. Donald Trump is not a neoconservative, and John Bolton is, and he wrote a book, I think, that was a disgrace. To keep a diary and then turn that into a book when you leave office, I think is wrong. On Russia, let me simply say that Trump expelled 60 diplomats when the Skripal poisoning occurred. That unlike President Obama, he was willing to both sanction, expel Russians, and also at the same time sell lethal weapons to the Ukrainians, which the Ukrainians will tell you was critical, the javelins, to their efforts at the first phase of the war. And I think at the end of the day, what President Trump wants to achieve with regard to Ukraine is some kind of a a ceasefire that again kind of squares the circle. He's basically said this. He said to the Russians, if you don't stop fighting, we're going to arm the hell out of the Ukrainians. And he's told the Ukrainians that you're going to need to come to some sort of agreement with the Russians, or else we're going to cut you off. I think and this is not someone who is, this is not a pro-Putin position. This is a pro-peace position. I think Harris will eventually come to the same position if she's elected. And the Europeans increasingly are moving in that direction. And I think what we're likely to see is some kind of a long negotiation period followed by, I would predict, European peacekeeping force there, EU peacekeeping force that will be an original thing that will lessen the burden on the United States. We will certainly back the peacekeeping force with our military behind it and our enormous capabilities that the Europeans don't have. As for Pennsylvania, I would say, look, I think it's tough. Look, there are a lot of union households. The union households are not necessarily happy with the decision of the labor union leadership, whether it be the United Steelworkers, who are, if you talk to them, they've been very pleased by their interactions with Nippon Steel, and may not follow the union leadership, which is very closely tied to the Harris campaign. With the United Auto Workers are quite concerned about the direction of electric vehicles that the Biden administration has been pushing. So we'll see where all this turnout goes. A lot also is going to depend on religious Christian voters, and some of those may be turned off by President Trump's open statements that he's not for a national abortion ban, that he's not for the kinds of things that are in Project 2025, which was not a Trump project, and which he didn't like from the outset because people were raising money off of his his presidency and the like. So good. I want to keep it short because I don't want Glenn to say I'm hogging the time again. But I have the tougher job defending Donald Trump to a liberal think tank audience.
Okay, well, you have already talked about the impact on the Ukraine and so forth.
Can I just add one point, though?
Please.
Again, talks about Trump is outside the box thinker. Yeah, but look, when you're dealing with the world, and especially with allies, I mean, one of the most important things in international relations is to have some notion of predictability and some notion of stability. And that is not what Trump provides. I mean, he makes spur-of-the-moment decisions based on personal preferences. I mean, that's not the way you keep alliances. I mean, the Europeans were Japan was a counterexample, but the European allies were all really concerned about Trump. And until July 21, frankly, as you know, a lot of U.S. allies were really, really wondering what they should do if Trump would come back to office. So I don't think that his way of conducting policy is something that is preferred by our allies. But anyway, can you have some questions for us?
Yeah, you want to respond to that? Maybe.
I'd say the following. Trump had no problem with Japan. Okay, I will say Japan was not necessarily thrilled with all the outreach to North Korea, certainly, but there was no problem with Japan. There was no problem with India as a partner. Trump made sure the Quad was revived under his leadership in concert with Shinzo Abe. It was the first time in American history we adopted a strategic doctrine, the free and open Indo-Pacific, from another country that I can think of, a major strategic doctrine which has redefined our foreign and defense policy in Asia. I would say in Europe, Trump's problem with Europe is twofold. It really was a German problem. He did not trust Angela Merkel. He thought Angela Merkel lied to him about German defense spending, about the failure of German armed forces to keep their equipment up. You say, Angela, your planes, they fly, they don't, you make the best cars in the world. Your planes don't fly, your ships don't sail, your helicopters can't get off the ground, your submarines don't submerge. What is this about? You have the money to do this. You're an enormous country. He felt they were taking advantage of some trade, and they were certainly taking advantage of our defense umbrella by building Nord Stream 2, which every single neighbor of Germany opposed. Maybe Switzerland and Austria didn't, but every NATO ally neighbor of Germany opposed because they saw the threat that it posed to Ukraine. And it was this nonsense that U.S. natural gas would cause more pollution at the end of the day and be more dangerous for climate, when all of us knew that that this war was coming as a result of of Nord Stream 2, which was an attempt to bypass Ukraine and deal directly with the Germans, make Germany economically dependent on Russia so that it wouldn't take action against Ukraine when this war began. So Trump, and that problem remains. Unlike, and I was in graduate school in Germany. I speak fluent French and German. I don't speak Japanese. 1989, I was a graduate student in Germany. And I just want to say that I think, that's the real problem. And with the Titan vendor not taking off, Germany is going to be a problem again. I think Trump will look to, as he did in his last administration, to preferred bilateral partners. I think in Europe, it's going to be Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, who is a populist conservative, and then also an outside the box thinker with whom he'll work closely. He'll obviously work closely with President Milei of Argentina, again with Prime Minister Modi. I think he'll have good relations with President Yoon, I'm optimistic if Ishiba, returns as prime minister, which he will in all likelihood, that the president will have good relations with him as well. I think they're both also sort of outside the box thinkers who care about rural areas and are willing to ask tough questions.
Do you think the Europeans are happy about Trump potentially withdrawing from NATO?
He's not withdrawing. That is just nonsense. It is a non-issue. Keith Kellogg said that. He was frustrated with Germany. Now the latest talk was after he met with President Duda of Poland, of getting the Europeans to 3% of GDP. His frustrations with Europe began with the Germans playing us on Nord Stream and playing us on defense and on trade and on China and on Iran. And where he has, he's been very happy with the big increases in defense spending in Europe. He's obviously more focused towards the eastern parts of Europe, where they take deterrence defense seriously. This is just a non-starter. There's no discussion of him. Keith Kellogg will tell you, travels all the time. This has never come up in recent years.
All right.
So,
but what about Ukraine? You rethink that Trump's position on Ukraine furthers security for the NATO countries? Putin obviously rooting for Trump to become president because he thinks that if Trump becomes president, the U.S. will withdraw aid for Ukraine. And is that the situation you want to see, where Ukraine is basically at the mercy of the Russians?
First of all, Donald Trump will not let Ukraine be at the mercy of the Russians. It's just
Really?
That's just not the
guarantee us that.
I can guarantee that. You mark my word. I promise you. This is not Joe Biden pulling Afghanistan and leaving tens of thousands of people running to get on an airplane because it's an old guy who is just stubborn and refuses to look at the world. Donald Trump is someone who double checks policy advice, is constantly calling world leaders, does not want to look like
what about Afghanistan?
He wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan. His deal with Afghanistan was very different than Biden's. Donald Trump's is exactly like Donald Trump's deals with Putin. I mean, when Donald Trump early,
we don't know.
We do know because there weren't any, because the Alpha Bank server didn't exist, and that whole thing was a sham, the Russiagate stuff, so and the Pulitzer Prize
that he's had with Putin.
I have no idea what they're about, but I know the conversations he had in the Oval Office where friends of mine were present, where there was an early video conference with Putin. Trump has now talked about it, in which he spoke to Putin. He said, "You are not going into Ukraine," and Putin gave him a look like, he said, "No, you're not doing it under my presidency. We have got Moscow will be targeted," and Putin looked at him, and then Trump went through a list of the weaponry we have that could launch attacks against Moscow, and Putin did not go into Ukraine under President Trump. Let it be noted. Period. So it was under President Bush. It was under President Obama, and by the way, President Biden is now blaming President Obama for not taking sufficient action against Crimea. And it was the Biden administration incidentally that had this idea about parking Russia. The idea is, let's take the sanctions off Nord Stream 2 as a gift to President, ostensibly as a gift to Angela Merkel, but it actually is a gift to Putin. We're going to let Putin understand we're not going to stop Nord Stream 2. He doesn't need to invade Ukraine. And you take that with the Afghan withdrawal. Trump's view on the Afghan withdrawal is very different. I mean, look, I was not for the Afghan withdrawal, period. Let me say that. But his view was again, squaring the circle. He brings the Taliban in. He felt we were spending way too much money in Afghanistan. And he brought the Taliban leader in for a video conference again. And he starts talking to the leader, and he says, look, if this is going to work, you cannot kill Americans in this 1 year period that we have before this withdrawal potentially will go into place. And then Trump hits a button on this video conference and says, we're watching you and your family 24/7. We know where you are. And you see a picture of the guy's house, and you see one of his kids leaving the house. He goes, we're targeting you. If you target Americans, you will pay the price. And that's a deterrent-oriented president who understands You don't give up Bagram Air Base, which Trump would never have done. You don't just say the hell with it, we're pulling out. And similarly, with regard to Ukraine, this is complicated. This is going to be messy. It's been a complicated, messy war. I would much rather have had the Ukrainians not, cuffed by an administration. I didn't want them to use all this weaponry. And it's been a drip, drip, drip of weaponry that has made things more complicated for Ukraine. But I think that President Trump, at the end of the day, will square the circle and come up with some sort of a idea that steps that will truly guarantee Ukraine's security. He doesn't want to be a loser. He doesn't want Ukraine to fall. It does him no good, does Europe no good.
Well,
and the like. So, and that's
let me
basically all we want about what Trump may or may not do. But I mean, the past speaks for itself, I think, and the failures of the Trump administration.
Well, as does the failures of the Biden administration. We saw Harris totally fine with the Afghan withdrawal.
The basis of which was said by the Trump people.
Not the way,
The
not
basis-
that. It would.
The Afghan government was not involved in the negotiations at all.
No, I agree. I didn't like that. I didn't support it. Okay. But I do think this was a deterrent focused withdrawal as opposed to we just got to get the hell out of here withdrawal.
Okay, gentlemen, let me ask this question. There is a concern, to be honest, on the part of a European country, depending on who you're talking to. But if Trump would be chosen, he could call President Putin the first day of his office and try to make a deal, and while guaranteeing security of Ukraine by pushing their entry into NATO and asking Ukraine to concede on the territory, and then there could be some more arms and ammunition provided to Ukraine, so that Ukraine will be in a better position to negotiate on the peace. Is that more or less workable, you think? Or is there continue to be a resistance on the part of Ukraine because they don't want to concede territories or whatever? What's your view?
Look, my sense, my sense is very much of this, that there's going to be a complicated, long negotiation that's going to take significant security guarantees from the United States. But the Europeans really have to have skin in the game for this to work. I don't see Ukraine becoming a NATO member anytime soon, but I can imagine some form of NATO-like guarantees being given to Ukraine as part of the solution to this thing. And with the Ukrainians, as Robert O'Brien, the Trump National Security Advisor, becoming members, being put on the pathway to EU membership. But Trump is not going to make a unilateral agreement. President will not make a unilateral agreement with Putin. You can't do that. The Ukrainians have to be part of the process. It is not like the Obama administration, which made an Iran nuclear deal without including either our Sunni Arab allies or our Israeli allies who are the most affected by Iran. It's just not feasible, not possible. The Europeans wouldn't stand for it, and Trump wouldn't do it.
Well, it's very clear, though, that if Trump becomes president, then Putin's hand will be strengthened and Ukraine will be weakened and the leverage will be on the Russian side. And it's quite clear that's what's going to happen. Exactly. That's why Putin wants Trump to be the president, because he thinks he'll get a better deal with Trump in office.
But he actually said he wanted Harris to win on that.
Look, you saw the smile on his face. That was the most, cynical black humor that you could expect from Putin. But it was so clear that, and I guess you don't think that the Justice Department, the FBI, and the intelligence agencies are being truthful when they say that Russians are trying to spread disinformation to favor Trump and disfavor the Democrats.
It's actually the Iranians have taken a much bigger effort to favor the Democrats this time. Yeah, look, I am not worried about Russian influence at all on President Trump. I think, as I say, he's a deterrent.
How can you be so
because I saw his record in office where Vladimir Putin, where sanctions were slapped on the Russians. They didn't go into Ukraine. This man understands. Part of Trump's strategy is keeping people off balance. He does it to his allies, which drives them crazy, certainly, but he certainly does it to their adversaries, because Putin really did not know whether Trump was going to, that Trump had this hard edge. And I can assure you in private, this will continue, period. It's just the kind of man he is. He's not I think he likes to, he understands the personality of these autocrats. in a way, and he doesn't want to necessarily publicly humiliate them, but he likes to deliver strong messages behind closed doors.
Okay, I think we continue to go on about Ukraine, but let us move on to some other subject. There is a concern in some quarters about the President Trump on his treatment with China, especially on the economic front. There could be more difficult times ahead in terms of sanctions and raising the tariff and so forth, and then get into negotiations. We would talk about Taiwan, but either Harris or Trump, I think general reading is that United States could be more protectionist. Is that the right reading?
Well, I think so. I mean, he says he loves tariffs. And I guess some reports are saying he's going to slap 100% tariffs on all Chinese products, or maybe 60%, but 10 to 20% on everybody else. That's really not going to make friends or improve the U.S. economy.
So what do you think? I mean, all this impact on the U.S. economy, I mean, inflation impact.
Well, I mean, it's clear. I mean, that there's certain things that Trump did when he was the president regarding China that I think were good. However, the so much touted deal that on trade deal didn't really produce much results. And so I think, Trump is effective as a marketer. He's a tremendous marketer. But in terms of the actual results with China, I think they're very paltry. And I mean, the Biden people, kept many of the tariffs in place. But I think if Trump becomes president, he's going to add additional tariffs, which will have a negative impact on the U.S. economy, and especially in terms of inflation. And I think the Biden people have been much more strategic. I'm not a big fan of Biden's foreign policy generally, but I would say that with regard to China, Biden has been much more strategic in focusing on supply chains and on the telecommunications, semiconductors, areas where the U.S. does need to put restrictions with regard to China. I think Trump's kind of across the board is just much too, I would say, unstrategic. It's just it's kind of an expression of how upset he is. It's not an expression of how to make sure that U.S. industries are going to be able to compete more effectively with China.
You want to say anything about it?
No, look, I'd say first, look, I think President Trump's views on China changes. He was in office when he came in. He focused on China as a currency manipulator, talked about wheat and soybean. And over time, he really came to understand, thanks to briefings by the CIA, by Mike Pompeo in particular, about the high-tech threat that China 2025 posed. And I think that Trump deserves huge credit for being the first president to really recognize the geostrategic competition with China, the fact that we could not trust China, that we couldn't trust the word of Chinese leaders, and recognize the technological threat that China posed. And I think we obviously saw the fight against Huawei in the first term, and various trade sanctions being put in place on technology. I think in the second term, there's going to be much more of a targeted focus on the tech sector in China, making sure that we also disengage from dependence on China in the in the medical, the biomedical, the rare earth sector, which is an area that the Biden-Harris policy on electric vehicles, including the policy of somehow allowing CATL, a Chinese battery manufacturing company, to build electric battery plants for Ford under the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of that was allowed, which deepens our dependence on China. So I think Trump's going to have a more targeted approach here. He also doesn't trust Xi Jinping. He has learned after COVID, and I think the vast majority of people who really pay attention would understand that COVID came out of the lab in Wuhan, that you can't trust the Chinese. You need to deal with them to make sure that the worst situation doesn't get worse. My fear is that under a Harris administration, there will be much more of a focus on cooperation with China. If we see Susan Rice and others coming back in an attempt to deal with the climate change issue, which will aggravate China's ability to leverage our supply chains at times of crisis.
I think if there's one thing that Democrats and Republicans agree on, it's the rivalry with China. But in particular on this issue of currency manipulation that you referred to, you may recall early on in the Trump administration, Trump was quoted as saying that I may not label China as a currency manipulator if I can get Xi Jinping to help me with regard to North Korea and the nuclear issues. So I mean, to me, this is kind of shows exactly the kind of deal making and the kind of not putting an emphasis on policy and substance and working with allies and just coming up with these ideas on his own that I think make the U.S. much weaker in the international context.
Yeah, Glenn, I was sort of apprised of those discussions. It was actually Henry Kissinger who went to the White House early on because the North Korea threat was so real and told President Trump in a briefing, told Vice President Pence, we need China on board if we're going to have sanctions. There is a possibility of bringing them on board. I'm sure that Kissinger was involved in discussion with the Chinese, but you have to give the Chinese something,
So you're blaming Henry Kissinger for Trump's mistakes.
But in the end, the Chinese actually signed on to those sanctions, and the sanctions were really quite effective early on. It has actually been more recently under the Biden-Harris administration that the North Koreans have become a major supplier of arms to Russia and have started getting, oil from Russia and have been able to fully escape from these sanctions.
Well, before finishing your conversation and asking the audience to speak, since you mentioned about this Nippon Steel issues, that is also related to the post-election alliance management, where the United States is looking at Japan as real friends and allies, or more sort of a friend of U.S. workers and so forth. The situation is more complicated, but still, I think this reminds me of some of the situation in the previous election when there was the TPP debate was going on. So you think that if the Trump will be chosen, is there any shift of the positions taken so far?
I don't think so. I think if Trump wins, there's no chance of a deal going through. I think if the Harris administration comes into office and if Nippon Steel is able to persuade the labor union, which is the single most thing, and if there's a way to get Cleveland-Cliffs to back off, then I think there is a possibility a deal could go through, because the opposition that many have posited has to do with the opposition of the labor union. If the labor union agrees with the management of Nippon Steel, I think the reason for opposing will not stand because there's not much in terms of national security concerns. My understanding, and maybe Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that Trump and Bob Lighthizer and others, their opposition deals not only with so-called national security, but with reciprocity, and their view that Japan would not allow Nippon Steel to be bought by some American or foreign company. And that reciprocity issue is also in addition to national security and labor unions. And I don't think that issue is there with the Harris people. So I think, as I say, if those conditions are met of the ability to persuade labor unions and to make sure the national security issues are not serious, and getting Cleveland-Cliffs to back off, then the deal could go through.
You want to say?
Yeah, look, I mean, I actually think it's going to go through, and I think it's going to have to go through under the Biden administration because of the 45-day clock that's going on, as I understand it. But you know far more about trade than I ever will know.
Well, they withdrew the application from CFIUS.
Oh, they did, because I thought their decision is now being forced. Okay,
No.
my sense, I disagree with you to some degree. I agree. The key thing is getting the steel workers to meet directly with Nippon Steel, and for Nippon Steel and the steel workers to come up with a deal. I'm convinced there's a deal between Cleveland-Cliffs and the steel workers, which probably involves sort of money for job training or something that the union wants, so it can increase its expand its operation is what's going on. And U.S. Steel, they've been very frustrated with the U.S. Steel, as have many, and so, but I think there's also growing support in other elements of the Democratic Party, because I think the rank and file increasingly wants this deal. There have been articles in the Wall Street Journal elsewhere that say that, people realize that Nippon wants to invest, wants to do what Japanese companies do, which is invest in communities. And I also think you're hearing African-American leaders concerned about the impact on Gary, Indiana, which is actually where more U.S. steel workers are located than in Pittsburgh. And they're eager to have new ownership of U.S. steel because they feel they've gotten the short shrift. So I actually think that the odds are good under a Trump administration that the deal will go through. I think the reciprocity issue is definitely an issue that's important, but I think the other issue that's important is this notion that Lighthizer brings up, which is that when foreign direct investment comes in, capital goes right back to the company that makes the country that makes the foreign direct investment. I think Nippon has the ability to make the case that they're going to invest very heavily in the United States in job training, in environmental protections, and also in first-class technologies that will help the country. So I'm optimistic that under a Trump administration that there would be a very serious possibility that the deal would be approved. But I agree, if there's a Harris administration, everything depends on organized labor's willingness to sit down and talk to Nippon. Nippon has had great meetings with the rank and file, both in Mon Valley and in Gary. But these meetings were cut off because I think the labor union leaders saw that Nippon was making a strong case and they didn't want that case made.
Okay, I'd like to make the floor open. Yes, please. Quote your name and affiliation.
Thank you so much for doing this. My name is Atsushi Okudera from Asahi Shimbun. Yes, it's quite interesting, debate today. And I'd like to ask a little bit bigger picture about the international order. As we all know, we are facing the war and conflict, of course, which is in Ukraine and Gaza in Israel. But unfortunately, we international community are not able to stop this kind of serious war. And my question is both Dr. Weinstein and Dr. Fukushima. If the President Donald Trump will be elected, or the Kamala Harris elected as the President of the United States, how the international order after the election, meaning the 5 years, the 5 years after the election, maybe 10 years, how the international order, particularly we are facing, if the Donald Trump, he's always saying, we can stop, he can stop the Ukraine war immediately before the becoming back to the president. But we are all concerned, if he stopped without Russian, without withdrawing the Russian troops, it is exactly if the Donald Trump or international community admit the occupy from the Russia, it's a big mistake, and also it's a collapse of the international order. But at the same time, the current administration also not able to stop. So, how this administration is going to stop this kind of conflict if something happens, including a Taiwan contingency, and how, particularly about China, how the both administration is going to confront the most significant competitor for the United States, which means China. Thank you.
Well, it's 100 million questions, but please go ahead.
Let me start by saying that it's very difficult for either of us to speculate about what specific policies that a Harris administration or Trump administration would follow. But I think that if we look at the backgrounds of these two individuals, I think we can draw some conclusions about how they look at the world. Fundamentally, my understanding, although Ken may correct me if I'm wrong, because I think he knows former President Trump certainly more than I do, his view is that after World War II, the United States emerged as the most important and powerful country in the world, was challenged only by the Soviet Union, and the US was a superpower in terms of economy, military, everything. However, over time, our allies have managed to take advantage of the United States. Not only have they traded and exported products, they don't import products from the United States. They manipulate their currency. They're free riders on defense. I mean, this whole litany of things that Donald Trump was saying back in the 1980s and 90s, which is well documented, that is fundamental basis of his looking at the world. And that's why he doesn't trust international organizations. And that's why he doesn't get along well with allies. On the other hand, Kamala Harris is a person, mother was from India, father was from Jamaica. They met at Berkeley, and Kamala Harris grew up in California. Now, California, as you may know, is the 5th largest economy in the world after the US, China, Germany, and Japan. It's got agriculture in the inland. It's got Silicon Valley technology in the north. It's got Hollywood in the south, biotechnology towards San Diego. It is a state that has prospered based on trade, investment, and immigration. So I think, and being more than 20 years younger, about 20 years younger than President Trump, I think she has a much more realistic view of the world, much more up-to-date view of the world. I think Trump's view of the world is actually about 40 or 30 years behind the times. And so I am much more optimistic of a Harris administration being able to work with allies and try to secure America's prosperity in the future than I would be under Trump, who has this view of American carnage. That was in his inaugural address. It's like all these other countries are taking advantage of the United States, and that's why we have to shut them out. We have to deport all these immigrants. I mean, it's a very xenophobic view of the world.
First, let me say, I don't think Donald Trump is a xenophobe. 2 of his 3 wives were from Eastern Europe. And he's also talked about the need to allow foreigners who graduate from American universities to stay in the country as well. And what bothers him is illegal immigration and the massive flows that we have seen under the Biden-Harris administration across the border. Look, on global order, I think Glen's view of Trump, Trump's view of these international institutions is that they are failing institutions. His view is that, I think it comes from his own experiences in business, that he grew up in Queens, as did I. He went to Manhattan, transformed the Manhattan real estate world, but felt after he did that he didn't get the respect that he deserved from the establishment, which takes care of each other, but really doesn't have a deeper outside perspective on things. If Trump looks at international institutions, whether it be the World Trade Organization, which has failed to deal with the Chinese state-owned enterprise challenge, and has failed really to figure out how to deal with China's mercantilistic policies effectively. He looks at the United Nations, which was really effective in the period when the sanctions were put on North Korea, but otherwise has been an utter failure across the board, where you have the representatives of dictator nations voting constantly against the United States. And it was under Trump that he finally said, look, we're going to start to take names and numbers and make people pay for voting against us in the UN. This is not a free vote. And so I think Trump's view, and Trump is skeptical of the world order. It was the famous situation up at the Canada G7 summit, where Angela Merkel had her arms folded. Shinzo Abe was there with Minister Nishimura, with Advisor Nishimura. Trump was there. They were arguing about the summit language, and Trump eventually said, "I'm not accepting this term, the world order. But I'll tell you what, whatever Shinzo wants, I'll do." And what did that mean? And Shinzo Abe said, let's talk about world order, not the world order, because I think Trump understands that the institutions that were set up in the post-World War II period are not doing an effective job today at either keeping the peace or otherwise. And he understands that it is the American deterrent that is essential to keeping the peace around the world, whether it be in the Taiwan Straits, whether it be in the East China Sea, whether it be on the Korean Peninsula, whether it be in Europe or elsewhere. And I think his view is that we are not getting the respect we deserve for our contributions, and we need our partners and allies to step up and do more. But these institutions have become a joke, period. And I think that the United Nations is a debating society filled with hypocrisy. And I give huge credit to Prime Minister Kishida for the extraordinary work he did with the G7 to make the G7 the focus of efforts on Ukraine and on supply chain management. And I think that's a very healthy dynamic.
Okay, all right, very short, please.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Koi Ida. I'm with NHK. If I can ask you a little bit more about the Nippon Steel, US Steel deal. I think the Japanese public was taken aback because number one, if this is rejected, it'll be the first case of a Japanese company since CFIUS was built in 1975. But the other is that how much power the labor unions have. So my question is, should we see this as the new power of American labor? Because there's this huge issue on Japanese business leaders' minds right now.
Look, Shirley, let me take a crack at Glenn, and those labor unions. Look, my sense is actually, yeah, this is the power of American labor in an election year where you have a president. Look, the way I think of Joe Biden is a throwback to the old Catholic, ethnic labor union Democrats, a kind that really doesn't exist anymore in the United States. Many of these people become Reagan Democrats. The labor unions themselves have shifted, but he is a throwback to that period. I honestly think if this deal doesn't go through, it is going to be the end of the United Steelworkers, because I think Cleveland-Cliffs doesn't have the money to invest in this. There are going to be huge layoffs, even if Cleveland-Cliffs does take over, because they don't have the capacity. They don't have the capacity to make U.S. Steel a world-leading authority, a world-leading steel maker, and they also there are going to be serious antitrust questions about rolled steel and Cleveland-Cliffs controlling it. So I think there's actually going to be, it may be the political apex, but it'll also be the nadir for the nadir for the U.S. for the United Steelworkers as well if this deal goes under, because the steelworkers will lose their jobs. And they're well aware of this. If you read the coverage of the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and elsewhere about steelworkers quite concerned about their future.
Well, I do think that it does represent the power of U.S. labor unions, but especially in this election year. It is, if it were not an election year, this would not be the major issue that it is. So because it is the election year, it gives leverage to the labor unions to demand more. And then the complication of Cleveland-Cliffs is added to that. So yeah, so I think it does represent power of labor unions, but it is a rather unusual set of circumstances. And I don't necessarily think
The timing and the location.
Excuse me?
The timing and the location, you mean,
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
well, the timing, the location, Pennsilvania being such an important state, but also this other party. I think we cannot underestimate the role of Goncalves, the CEO of Cleveland-Cliffs, and what he's been doing with the labor unions and with the politicians to try to block the deal because he wants to go ahead with the deal. But I agree with Ken that if the Nippon Steel deal is rejected, then Cleveland-Cliffs is going to have to, I mean, there's a lot of antitrust issues. And I think overall labor unions are not going to benefit by having Cleveland-Cliffs take over U.S. Steel.
Okay, okay, Ambassador Shi, very short, please.
Thank you. Masayoshi from JIIA. Two quick questions. First question is, you didn't talk much about congressional elections. What's your view about the outcome of the House and the Senate? Second question, you didn't talk much about how to solve the problems. You did about Ukraine, but you didn't talk much about Gaza. How are you going to solve Gaza?
I'll answer the first, if Ken will answer the second. The first question is, with regard to the Senate, it's 51-49 now, but Joe Manchin is not running, so West Virginia will definitely go Republican, so it becomes 50-50. Jackie Rosen in Nevada, John Tester in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, all have tough races. Maryland, Larry Hogan has some chance, probably not that much, against Angela Alsobrooks. So I think if the Democrats lose even one of those 5 races, then the Senate will go Republican majority. So that is a possibility. And I think at this point, my sense is that it's going to be very difficult for Democrats to hold on to all 5. So 1 or 2, I think, probably will go Republican. So the Senate probably will become majority Republican. On the House side, you know, there's so many races, it's hard to keep track of all of them. But my sense is on the House side, there is still a chance for Democrats to be able to take the majority, partly because the House, the Republicans have had a lot of mismanagement problems. And so I think in the House, it may turn out that the Democrats will be able to win that back. You want to take the second question?
Yeah. You know, I fully agree with my friend here. Hopefully we'll still be friends after this. I think that Tester is probably going to lose. And I actually think Sherrod Brown is in a much tighter race than he expected. And I actually think, the Nippon Steel thing could somehow come back to haunt him. But I think a lot of people who put money into these campaigns put a lot more money into Republican Senate races because they were fearful that Harris was going to win. And this is money that goes from Democrats to Republicans. It's not ideological money because they wanted to make sure that Harris did not have a free reign if she won. And I agree on the House side that, in part because there are 4 New York seats that have been redistricted, the Republicans have. And look, on Gaza, I think I'll say this. I think that the situation is improving every day, that Israel has now decapitated Hamas, and they've done so in an extraordinary way with casualties, but a 1-to-1 ratio between civilian and military casualties, which is unheard of in military history. And even the Gaza health authorities and others admit that of the 41,000 killed, that a majority have been Hamas fighters. Of course, every loss of life is tragic, but when you hide in people's houses, when you take over schools, hospitals, you put missile facilities in homes, and similarly, the operation in Lebanon has been nothing short of brilliant. The pagers, the walkie-talkies, killing and severely wounding Hezbollah agents who have been launching thousands of missiles, have killed Americans, have killed Europeans for years. Finally, someone is standing up to it. Then finally, the bold attack on Hezbollah headquarters when Prime Minister Netanyahu was speaking at the UN was extraordinary because they never thought that when the Prime Minister was speaking that the attack would take place. Hezbollah has been absolutely decapitated. Israel has been able to roll in and start taking apart missile sites. The more they can do, the people of Lebanon will be free. And in Gaza, the people are increasingly free of Hamas. It's not a done deal yet, but taking apart the tunnel structure, taking apart the Philadelphia corridor. And the hope is over time. And Israel knows that if Harris is elected, they're not going to have free reign. And they thought that Trump would get elected, they would have free reign. Next comes Tehran. Watch out. Between the election and the new year, Israel has extraordinary penetration in Iran at this place that is the source of international terrorism and that has been funding and creating havoc all over the world, a regime that is not terribly popular among its own people. But I think in Gaza, the real opportunity will be reconstruction and de-radicalization. And there we will need the Saudis, who have done an excellent job de-radicalizing their own population over the last few years, and the UAE to be involved in a reconstruction effort that will give the Palestinians hope for an economically secure future that will which will create schools that will focus on education, not on murdering Jews, where you have kindergarten classes where people play Palestinians killing Israeli soldiers. If you can change the textbooks, change the minds of the young people, convince parents that they shouldn't raise their children up to want to kill Jews, I think you're entering a very different world in Gaza of economic opportunity and prosperity. The Palestinians were always a very commercial, educated people until recent years with Hamas, Hezbollah, and that opportunity will hopefully bring itself back, but it's a long and torturous process. And the last thing in the world we need to do is to bring back UNRWA there. It should be defunded. The number of UNRWA employees who were terrorists and involved in things is just inexplicable. Another failure of the international system.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Sho Kawakita from Kyoto News. Thank you very much for your wonderful, exciting debate. And I have two quick questions, if I may. One on the Middle East follow-up, and the other is transition of power. I believe that everybody in this room is concerned about the deteriorating situation as a whole in the Middle East. And if Israel were to attack Iran's oil facilities or even nuclear facilities, how would that affect the campaign? That's first one for both gentlemen. And the other is political violence or transition of power. one of the extraordinary events we have seen in the past months was two assassination attempts of President Trump. And Chicago University, as you may know, the Robert Pave, a Chicago University professor on the political violence, expert on the political violence, published a very exciting article to the latest version of Foreign Affairs. And I'm struck by his stark prediction that the US will face a series of political violence in the years to come. Are you or can you be optimistic about the peaceful transition of power if particularly Mrs. Harris wins? Thank you.
All right, a quick response from both.
Okay, so on the first question, Ken has been following the Israel situation much more closely than I have, but I would have to say that I would expect that if President Trump wins and he probably will give Israel freer reign, which I think probably would not be good for the international order. I think that Harris administration would probably try to, while honoring the defense of Israel and protecting Israel, expect Israel to exercise some restraint. Because I think the last thing we want is to have a general conflagration or conflict in the region. So I think the Biden administration has been trying to do that, not probably as effectively as one might expect, but I would expect the Harris administration would redouble those efforts. So I'm myself more optimistic of peace in the Middle East if the Harris administration were to come into office. I'm sure Ken will have opposing views on that. On the second question about transition of power, I am certainly concerned about the possibility, and there have been a lot of articles and books written over the last several years about political violence in the United States. My sense is that if there is a relatively clear outcome, and if Kamala Harris wins, the Trump people will not accept it. They'll contest it. They'll take it to court. They'll do all kinds of things to try to subvert the election results. And I think we've seen in just within the last several weeks, Republican leaders, again, refusing to accept the results of the 2020 elections. And so I think that we could see some, at least in the courts. Now, to what extent this could spill over into a violent set of actions, I don't really know, but I do think that the US government, now the Biden administration, having experienced January 6th, is prepared, is making preparations to certainly protect the Capitol building and other offices in Washington, but also I think law enforcement and maybe even National Guard will be on alert. So I am hopeful that even if there is some outbursts of political violence, that there will be taken care of more effectively than it was back on January 6th. Now, my own hope, and this is the last question, my own hope personally is that if Kamala Harris wins, the Republicans, many Republicans, I think, will come to the conclusion that they've lost 3 times with Donald Trump. They lost in 2020. Many of the people he supported in 2022 lost. He again lose in 2024. And therefore, after 3 attempts, I think many Republicans will conclude that they should go in a different direction. And so, and obviously people like J.D. Vance and others will try to carry on the Trumpism. And there will be some success, but I think that the strength of the Trumpism will subside to some extent if he loses in this election.
No, of course, we definitely hope for a peaceful transition of power, and it's very important that it be peaceful, that the results be clear and be accepted. Period, and that if there is political violence, that it be punished. I mean, period. All acts of it. Let me note, and the Secret Service has to do a much better job protecting presidential candidates. Look, let me answer the Iran question. Look, I think that that Israel has gotten the message: do not attack the oil fields before the election. I think no one wants to see a global spike in oil prices, and I suspect that the nuclear facilities wouldn't be attacked either. I think if President Trump were elected, I think that Israel might be assisted by the U.S., and the U.S. and Israel together could 100% assure that Iran's nuclear program was sent to the dustbin of history. If Israel does things alone, it's a much more complicated operation, though they would certainly have assistance from the Saudis and the Azeris. But so.
Okay, before concluding, let me pick up one or two questions from online participants, if I may. This is Dr. Weinstein. Given the fact that Prime Minister Ishiba had a difficult relationship with Prime Minister Abe, do you think that that fact might bias Mr. Trump's view of Mr. Ishiba and possibly strain their personal relationship?
No, I really don't. Look, I think that Japan does have an extraordinary card, which is Akie Abe. She is beloved by the Trumps. They felt her pain. They were the Prime Minister and the President were very close. And in private, when I saw Prime Minister Abe, we talked about my friend Donald Trump after Trump left office. And Akie is very warmly viewed. That being said, I think that the president, I think Prime Minister Ishiba, like Donald Trump, is, as I said, is an outside-the-box thinker. He's someone to raise difficult questions. They won't go golfing. I don't know that their wives will be friends, but I think that there's every reason to think they would be able to build a strong and productive relationship.
All right. Actually, this is addressed to both, but I would take this question to you. How do you view Prime Minister Ishiba's idea of an Asian version of NATO and the revisions of Japan-US Security Treaty? Is it possible that these will come up in a future discussion between Japan and the United States?
Well, I'm not in a position to know Mr. Ishiba's thinking. I will have to say that I did see when I was in Washington, D.C., some videos of Mr. Ishiba discussing these issues. And I've noted that after he took office as prime minister, that he has pulled back a bit. It's not put them as top priority. I think that the view among many security experts in the United States is this notion of a Asian NATO is rather unrealistic at this point. And as I understand it, the foreign minister of Japan has said this is something to think about in the future. And so I don't expect that this is going to come up, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Prime Minister Ishiba was thinking. On the notion of the revision of the Status of Forces Agreement, I mean, I know that Mr. Ishiba, Prime Minister Ishiba is studied security issues very thoroughly, and I can understand the thinking behind his desire to have some changes in the Status of Forces Agreement. I think he may be unrealistic about the possibility of that happening very soon. And my understanding is that experts have been advising the prime minister that it probably would not be the best issue to bring up in a first meeting with the U.S. president.
You want to say something?
I'm glad to say I'm in complete agreement with my own friend Glenn on something today. But I actually don't think the idea of eventually revising the Status of Forces Agreement is a bad idea. Look, I don't think it should be the question of whether Japanese forces, should be under Japanese law while serving in the U.S. But the question of the fact that Japan, with the 3 security documents, now understands it is increasingly responsible for its own security, and it's going to be a weapons exporter, and it's going to work much more closely with the United States and the global alliance, changes some of the terms. So I think at the right moment, doing this it will be a welcome thing if done in the right way.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd like to conclude this forum. Would you kindly give them a line from the club? Thank you.